This is Democracy Watch. Okay, so Mark, this is the video I've been waiting to record with you. There are efforts by Republican state officials in both Ohio and Alabama to keep Joe Biden off the ballot in November. So what was their argument here, and how seriously should we take these threats by these Republicans in charge in those states?
I mean, this is really quite a study of hypocrisy. You know, for years and years and years, I mean, going back, you have the two parties that have their conventions in the summer, and there's actually, believe it or not, some measure of coordination between the two, right? One needs to go earlier and one needs to go later by definition. And you don't want them obviously overlapping with one another. The media wants to be able to cover each of them separately. It's actually in their candidates' interest to have them covered separately. So inevitably, one of these conventions is in July, and one of these conventions is in August. Now, to get on the ballot, to have your name put on the ballot as a major party candidate, every state makes you fill out some basic paperwork. If you're the Democratic Party, saying who's your candidate. If you're the Republican Party, who's your candidate. And you submit this paperwork in advance to print their ballots. And inevitably, there's always some glitch with some state law about the timing of the paperwork, or sometimes actually it's even like the timing of when the arena is free, or there'll be like a local ordinance that like doesn't allow noise after a certain hour. And there's always been a bipartisan understanding that if there's something that a Democratic mayor needs to fix, for example, to make sure the buses run later for the Republican convention, they do it. If there's something the Republicans need to do to fix a law, they do it. And in any event, this year for the Democratic convention, which is in August, Alabama and Ohio took the position that, oh, wait, I'm sorry, the conventions are too late for you to submit the paperwork for our ballots. And that attitude is, even in today's highly polarized world, really extraordinary and actually in an incredibly bad form.
And so I guess, what is the result? Do we have any resolution here? Does it look like they're going to be amenable to some change, or are they really going to dig in their heels here and just try to keep the sitting president off the ballot in these two states?
So interestingly, you saw kind of interesting politics here, because initially both secretaries of state were like, you're out of luck. The DNC, the Biden campaign proposed a number of reasonable compromises, like, hey, how about we give you provisionally the names of our candidates, so that you have them.
You might have heard of him. His name is Joe Biden.
Right,
He's the president of the United States.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then we'll firm it up afterwards. And initially their answer was no. And it now looks like both Ohio and Alabama's legislatures are going to take the steps necessary to fix this, so that this will not be, there won't be an issue. If it had been an issue, honestly, the Biden campaign and the DNC could have sued and overturned this nonsense, which would have wasted another lawsuit, and the taxpayers would have had to defend this lawsuit if you're in those two states, or they could have found another way to do a technical nomination in advance.
Now, to what extent do you think that these efforts are kind of testing grounds to see what Republicans can get away with? Because there was a ton of backlash here, but how do we know that they're not just, testing the fence, so to speak, to see where it's weakest? And if they could have sneaked by, they would have.
Oh, they're definitely testing the fence. I don't think there's any question in my mind that this was not their initial position was to see what the public reaction would be and how hard the Biden campaign would push. And I think there were two reasons why they wanted to test it. The first is, in Ohio in particular, I think the Ohio Republicans thought, well, let's just take a shot and see if he just takes a pass and doesn't need to be on the ballot. And that would have dramatically negative consequences in the Senate race, right? So I think that's part. But the bigger point, and I think this is the one that you're getting at, and it's something, I've written about on Democracy Docket and we've covered on Democracy Docket, is that you essentially have the Republican Party constantly trying to move the goalposts of what norms they can break. And so if they can break a norm, they want to break it because it gives them more running room for the next norm they want to break, right? So this time it's a law that, might keep them off the ballot. The next time, maybe it's a law that, lets them treat his name as printed on the ballot differently, in smaller font, or, on the second page, right? So I always think you got to always look at all of these rules changes that the Republicans are doing, or all of these places where they violate norms, as them trying to figure out what they can get away with, not just for that one instance, but for what it means for other things that they may care more about.
Or to that point, to try to normalize this stuff so that they can try the same thing 2 or 3 times. And maybe the backlash was swift and severe the first time, but a little bit more muted the second time, a little bit more muted than that the third time, because now we've gotten used to the extremism, and so they're just kind of banking on the fact that if they do the extremism enough times, then people will like kind of tire of screaming about it.
I think that's right. I also think it gives a talking point to the MAGA conspiracy theorists. Like, I don't want to give them any ideas, but I am sure there will be like a ballot truther, movement now. Joe Biden wasn't really eligible for the ballot because, of the dates.
Right.
Like it just feeds an overall effort by the Trump world to suggest that, the Democrats are not on the up and up, and, seeing how far Republicans can get away with rigging the rules.
And you had mentioned that this was covered extensively in Democracy Docket. That's where I got my info from this. So for those watching right now, if you want to follow along with everything that's happening in this world that Mark is in right now, please sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet he founded to focus on everything voting in elections. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, do you think that attempts like these are kind of retribution for Democrats rightly employing a system intended to keep insurrectionists off the ballot in accordance with the 14th Amendment?
I think that there's an element of Republicans that would say that that's what it is. That, essentially they would say Democrats tried to keep Trump off the ballot, so we're doing this. I think that is, first of all, there's no comparing. It's really apples and oranges. One involved the former president in inciting an insurrection in the nation's capital to try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power. The second involves literally the DNC working in cooperation with the RNC to make sure the two conventions are spaced out properly. So it's a crazy analogy to draw, but I also kind of don't buy it. I think the Republicans are going to test that fence regardless of what the Democrats do. Like, they're not going to operate in good faith. And I think that we just sort of, in one sense, I think we kind of like need to take this as an opportunity to internalize that. Like, there's no norm that Donald Trump will abide by because he feels like, you know what, I owe that to the Democrats to operate in good faith. They will operate in bad faith if they see any advantage to do so.
By the way, which is a reason that we shouldn't extend efforts of goodwill, because they will never be met with reciprocation by Republicans. So anytime Democrats try to say like, okay, well let's just do this for Republicans because it's a show of good faith, we're giving them something that we're not going to get back.
Yeah, I mean, look, I want to tell, I don't have a position one way or the other whether, if Speaker Johnson winds up in trouble, Democrats ought to save him or not. The one reason why I would not save him is that you think that somehow they would return the favor. Like, right, Republicans will never return the favor. They will never do the right thing because it's the right thing, and they'll never do something because they feel like, it's what Democrats did for us.
Yeah. If Trump was kicked off the ballot in accordance with Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, do you think that we would have seen these efforts in Ohio and Alabama actually succeed, and to do so in far more states than just those two?
Maybe. I mean, look, you might have had Republicans engage in retribution if Donald Trump had been kicked off the ballot. But I think that in some sense, asking that question is asking the wrong question, because I assume Republicans would do whatever they could do to begin with. But also,
regardless, yeah.
Right, regardless, but it also sort of, I think, by the way, unfortunately, we may see this in the Supreme Court decision about the immunity question. Like, one would have assumed if he had been kicked off the ballot, it was because the majority of the Supreme Court decided that it was going to apply the Constitution as written, and therefore there would be no way to kick Biden off the ballot, right? Like, there couldn't be retribution because there would be what we used to colloquially refer to as the rule of law, something that conservatives on the courts used to care a lot about, right? Yeah. And so we're seeing, I think, a belief now that anything goes in terms of Republican retribution, in part because the courts have kind of started to rule in a way that suggests to the American public that maybe it's just all political, like maybe it's not rule of law.
Yeah, well, kind of like how the so-called textualists have just watched somebody incite an insurrection and give aid or comfort to an insurrection. In fact, giving aid or comfort to insurrectionists has become a plank of his platform, and yet that guy was just, allowed carte blanche to do exactly that. So, so much for originalism. Mark, does the fact that this is happening, does the fact that yet another instance where Republicans could test the fence, does this worry you moving forward that they're figuring out more and more different ways where they can kind of allow themselves to kind of tear down the system in deference to their party or to their political benefit?
Absolutely. Look, let me tell you what has me most worried right now is I understand why there is so much interest in the Donald Trump criminal trial in New York. I genuinely do. I mean, I'm interested in it. It's historic. It's all of that. But, they're testing the fence while, frankly, a lot of people are not watching the fence, right? They are watching the TV screen with the 30th talking head talking about what the testimony of David Pecker meant. And in the meantime, things like what we're seeing in Ohio and Alabama take place. The voter suppression that you and I talk about takes place. Like, the Republicans are not fixated just on that one thing. They are recruiting 100,000 challengers. Laura Trump went on TV and said, we're going to have our people handling the ballots, right? And that's would be a massive violation of state law. And so I'm worried, candidly, that while we're watching one screen, they've got a whole bunch of screens set up in there, and we've got to make sure we are watching the fence as well.
Yeah, and that's a major reason that, I'm appreciative, and I know our audience is appreciative of being able to talk to you about this stuff, because I actually do think that, we kind of deride the crazies in that party, the Donald Trumps and the Carrie Lakes and the Marjorie Taylor Greens, but I think that the more serious and pernicious folks in the Republican Party kind of understand that those people redound to their benefit, because while all eyes are trained on Marjorie Taylor Greene doing her circus act in the parking lot of Congress, they can get away with doing the stuff that Steve Bannon is trying to get through, trying to push through, efforts to harass poll workers and election vigilantism and voter suppression and reducing the number of precincts in minority majority communities and on and on. And so I think this kind of ecosystem, they've figured out a way to rely and need the crazies in that party, because it gives them cover to do what they need to do under the cloak of darkness.
Yeah, and this is actually a very smart point you made to me, so I want to give you credit. I asked the question several weeks ago, going back now, why would the RNC, at the same time that it's hiring Charlie Spies, who is a well-respected, lawyer, and, brought in Bill McGinley to be their outside counsel, who, worked in the Trump administration, but, has a long pedigree as a lawyer. Why would they also have brought in Christina Bobb, right? Doesn't that undercut the message? And I think your basic point to me, and this may not have been an episode, this may have been off camera, but your basic point to me is no, actually, that's the perfect pairing, because she is dealing with elements of the base and the crazies that actually they also want to have going. It's not an either or. There's actually a synergy to the two.
Right. That's a great point. Well, again, this will be covered. All of what we're talking about is going to be covered in Democracy Docket. So for those who are watching right now who haven't yet signed up, please make sure to sign up. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.